Behind the Curtain with Jack Burkman.
Remember, if you want to take it behind the curtain, you call us 703-795-5364, 703-795-5364. Taking your emails now, jackburkman2016 at gmail. Coming into the 20th century, not the 21st, maybe never the 21st. A lot of people think we live in the 8th, and there was nothing wrong with the 8th century. Let me tell you, well, we're going to plunge into foreign policy now. Joining us now, William Ogborn, former U.S. Department of State Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy official, former aide and foreign policy advisor to a number of presidential campaigns, Dr. Ben Carson and Governor Scott Walker in 2016, the recent. William, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Jack.
Well, a lot going on. Let's start with Miss May. I mean, somehow she hangs on, which I expected her to be gone. She's a resilient creature. She's the resilient chameleon over there. And that's the resilient chameleon. I kind of like that. Brexit is about as big a mess as it can be. It would seem to me the only way out for her is to bring this to a second vote to the people like they did 2 years ago. Is that, what would you do? I guess the question, two questions. What's best for Britain? And then what would you do if you were Theresa May?
What's best for Britain really depends on how you're coming at this. You have the Remainers, which would say what's best for Britain is definitely staying in the EU. You have the soft Brexiters. They're saying what's best for Britain will be to get a deal with the customs union of the EU, get a good deal on the backdoor North Ireland situation and Ireland situation, and then go from there and see how we can possibly make deals to not fully sever our ties to the EU. And then you'd have the hard Brexiters, which would say the best for Britain is to just leave the continent altogether. We've got these deals lined up, possibly with the U.S., the other Five Eyes. Other countries are begging to get part of our economy because we're, a top 5 economy in the world. We can do a lot better. So it really depends on where you're sitting on this whole Brexit issue.
Second question now, what would you do if you're Theresa May? Should she put it to another public vote?
If she's going to be forced to try and get some kind of Brexit deal done, or go back to the EU and ask for an extension on this, because she can't afford another referendum vote.
Now, why not another referendum vote? Why?
Well, what would happen is if she goes for another referendum vote, the Tories lose power. And she's not going to risk that. She's going to do whatever it takes to make some
Now, you mean they lose power
deal.
if the referendum goes a certain way, or they lose power once you call for it?
I wouldn't be surprised if they lose power even once it's called for. Corbyn and the Labour Party and their allies are looking to get that second referendum and use that as a leveraging point to outshine the Tories.
All right, here's what I don't understand about British politics. For years, Corbyn and Labour have been Europhiles. They love the EU. Now, how is it that they can capitalize on Brexit? Because they don't really have anything to do with Brexit. I mean, they're Europhiles, right? So what's going on here?
They want to stay. So they're thinking if they can get another referendum, and they believe it will go for an anti-Brexit to stay with the EU, and they can then leverage that to get back into the power. They already have the help of the Scottish Independent Party there, and so Scotland is now there with them. And so it's the Tories holding on with their small allies to keep the original
I see. In other words,
going.
if you kill Brexit a second time, but then regardless of what would happen, would she be forced to call for an election? She's not due. Let's see, she's not due for an election. When would they have to call for elections? I mean, that's 5 years. She doesn't have to call for an election. I mean, what would happen?
Well, what would happen is since she has a bit of a coalition government, her allies would fall by the wayside, and then she would be open because there would be a no-confidence vote. And once that no-confidence vote happens, another election would have to be called.
Now, she already...
And that's what Corbyn was trying to force last week.
Okay, so there was a vote of no confidence. So then the vote, had Corbyn won on the vote of no confidence, then May would have been forced to call for an election.
Yes.
What would happen in British politics if you don't call for an election? That is, what if they'd prevailed on the vote of no confidence? Then the rules provide for a second vote in 2 weeks, right? What if she doesn't call for an election? Does the press then start putting pressure on the Tories? What would happen then?
Well, if she loses her governing coalition, then she she'd have no power. They wouldn't be able to get anything done, and they'd just be a rudderless ship,
like Germany,
running down,
like Germany right now. So then you just exist in that state of stalemate until somebody does call for an election.
Yes.
Let me ask you this technical question.
So.
The Queen can technically call for an election, but no Queen has intervened at that level probably in 200 years. No monarch in 200 years. Could the Queen call for an election? What happens if the palace says, I want an election?
Technically they could, but to do so kind of throws out the whole system they've been building for the past 200 years. So I think they would definitely try. The Queen would intervene in the sense of she will call Corbyn and May into the palace, and she'll sit down and talk to them, and they'll try and work out some kind of deal to go forward so she doesn't have to publicly call for anything like that. But I just cannot see the royal family getting involved like that. And I think you would also then see a lot of
Then you have the get rid of the royal family stuff. Then the labor starts with bills to abolition of the monarchy. Okay,
right.
So let me ask you this now. So if you get more time, I mean, obviously she can get more time from the EU. They wouldn't want to do it, but they'll have to do it. They don't have a choice. So what happens then? Then you drift on in this stalemate. I mean, you're evolving into the kind of paralysis that you talk about anyway, right? In other words, you're drifting right back into that. The same level of, if you ask for an extension, the same level of paralysis will essentially result, correct?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, eventually they have to either have that second referendum, which will either say, no, we do want the Brexit, absolutely, or no, we don't want the Brexit. And of course, if you have the second referendum saying, we do want a Brexit, you'll still have people trying to pump the brakes on that. But if you have them saying, no, we've changed our mind, then they'll immediately say, okay, great, we're going to stay. The elections have consequences, and this one certainly did. You know, it's that kind of cognitive dissonance that goes along with as long as the results are what I want.
Okay, now
so yes, she's a little bit stuck, but it looks like she's going to move towards something. And even if there's a no deal, there's a large segment of the Tory party that does believe a no deal is better than nothing at all. It's better than going forward in this weird stalemate, like you say. And we can actually get a great deal from the Americans and other countries if we go with the no deal.
All right, let me ask you this now. What if she calls for a referendum now and wins? You're talking about the downside. If she loses, it brings Labour back. The call for an election, I see all that. What if she wins and there's another reaffirmation of Brexit? What happens then?
Well, I think they could use that to really push it across the finish line. Now, remember, May was a Remainer when she was originally voting. So
she's a moderate. She's a moderate.
She's a moderate, so she wanted to stay with the EU. So she's looking for the best possible deal she can. If the EU can find that deal with them, she's going to go for a softer Brexit. If they refuse to make that deal, she can go with a harder Brexit, and she does stand to get a lot of gain from the U.S. if she does so. So if she calls for that, it gives her more leverage. But that's the big risk. And like I said, you could call for that, and if it's very close again, I mean, if we're talking like it's 50 point something to 49 point something, the Remainers are going to use that and say, listen, these people still don't know what they're voting for. It was too close.
I see. So they're going to, in other words, Corbyn wins either way. She's screwed either way. Corbyn's going to win either way, unless it's a big vote. I see. Corbyn wins either way. I see what you're, okay, that makes sense. So Corbyn has capitalized on what should have been a bad situation. He's very skillfully positioned Labour. The whole Brexit thing should have been a disaster for Labour, but nonetheless, he's positioned them very well, hasn't he?
Yes, he's doing the best he can with that ship, and May has. I mean, she is in a really tough position. I think any PM, if they had been in that position, I don't know that they could have done any better than May has. I mean, like you said, she keeps surviving. She keeps finding a way.
She's smarter than She's smarter than they think. She's a lot smarter than she looks.
Yes.
All right. So let me ask you this. Now, is there an American opportunity? For many years, I have argued that what we should do with Britain. I mean, Britain fundamentally doesn't like being in the EU. They kind of went into it reluctantly in '73. They've never really liked being part of the continent for obvious reasons. It's their history, et cetera, et cetera.
And in '75, they even had a vote to leave the EU.
Oh, there was a Brexit vote. I didn't know in '75.
There was a Brexit vote back in '75.
And they lost.
Decided to stay.
I see. I didn't realize that.
That just tells you this is not unprecedented.
Wow, interesting. I forgot about that. Okay, so I've had this idea for a long time, and that is that the United States should bring Britain into the dollar. Now, people scoff at this. Why don't we bring the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. into the dollar? I mean, what does Canada, 90% of the population lives within 50 miles of the U.S. border anyway. What does it really matter for Canada? It doesn't. Canada doesn't have a currency. The only currency they have is petroleum, which isn't a currency at all. It's like Venezuela, right? So they essentially have no central bank. They do only in theory. Their central bank is petroleum. So then you have the UK. Why doesn't the UK just join the dollar? That's what I think.
Well, I think it's a good thought exercise, but I don't think that would ever go through because, remember, the UK fought to keep the pound because it's very much central to their identity.
But the pound isn't sustainable long term. It's not long term sustainable.
It's one of those things. It's symbolic, but those symbols have power over people, and you can't just dismiss it, even if it would make sense to dismiss such things and be like, you know what, we need to move forward. I mean, it makes more sense for a lot of people to go to just a digital currency, but there are a lot of us that are like, wait, no, having the coin means something, and it also has a psychological effect of my national identity, and it has an effect on actually how I spend because I see and I feel how that difference that it makes. So there are a lot of psychological factors that go with I don't see Britain ever wanting to give up the pound. However, they stand to have a lot of benefits with the U.S., and I think the other Five Eyes, if they did leave, and those all go into the kind of trade deal we can offer them, a no-barrier trade deal. They cannot get that from the EU. It would open up sectors of their economy and their market that have been moribund.
Well, that's a good idea. In other words, why don't we just give them a complete – why don't we just – so there's two ways to effectively bring them into the currency. We can offer just tear down all barriers with the UK. We could just say, okay, no barriers, right?
Exactly. And that's actually what we've been scoping as a possible deal if – they do not remain part of the customs.
Well, that might benefit Britain more than anything else. Okay, time remaining, a couple of minutes remaining here. I want to tell you, okay, Syria. Now, briefly in Syria, I like Trump's decision to exit Syria because I don't think the U.S. I don't think we have any vital interest there at all. Do you agree?
We have the vital interest of making sure ISIS is defeated on the ground. They're never going to be defeated as an idea. The idea of the caliphate is centuries old. It's going to remain. But I would 100% agree with you that we do not have a long-term strategy of how to deal with Syria, that we should not be remaining there, especially when we have so many other platforms.
Isn't this Europe's problem, though? Because, I mean, the United States we're a net oil exporter as of last year. As of, I think, January of this year, we're now net oil export, beginning 19. I mean, doesn't it make more sense? Mideast oil is Europe's problem. It's Japan's problem. To the extent we need any Mideast oil for the United States, it's really just the Arabian Peninsula, which we can easily secure. Our interests in the rest of the region at this point are minimal, are they not?
The interests there tie into a lot of historical aspects that have gone along. And then, you also have the recent tie, of course, of the invasion in Iraq, the rise of ISIS, and Islamic fundamentalism. And then you also still have part of the remnants of the Cold War. How is Russia and the U.S. dealing with issues in there to face off against each other?
But see, that's just I don't want atavism, but should our foreign policy be driven by atavism? I don't want that, you see. I don't want it to be driven by atavism and old ideas. That's the issue.
Exactly. And so many people here in the D.C. foreign policy establishment cannot see beyond what used to be. It is not a case of looking at how can we best use our strategic pieces to our strategic advantage. How can we save money and still make sure things don't blow up and protect those, because we do have interests with Saudi Arabia, we do have interests with Israel, we do have interests with Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan, and we have also an ally, a NATO ally in Turkey that we're still having to deal with, even though they're really pushing back against us. So we're unfortunately stuck in there, but there are better ways of going about it than we've been going about it for the past 2 decades. And people do not want to rethink how we should address these issues. And that's the problem we're dealing with here in D.C.
William Ogborn, former U.S. State Department Public Affairs Advisor to Ben Carson and Scott Walker in 2016. Presidential campaigns. William, I'm sure we'll be seeing and hearing more about you in the world of foreign policy. Thank you so much. We'll be back.
All the stories and controversies that no one talks about, but everyone should know about.
Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking.
Behind the Curtain with Jack Burkman.
Welcome back. We turn now to healthcare, a subject near and dear to all of your hearts. Joining us now, Larry Wedekind is President and CEO of IntegraNet. CEO at Electronic Medical, and he does a wonderful charitable organization, Matthew's Hope. Larry is a leading national voice when it comes to all things healthcare, known to the president, known to the Congress, known to all health officials in Washington. Larry, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for making time today.
Well, I'm happy to be here, Jack. Thank you for having me.
Well, let me ask you this. The ACA, Affordable Care Act, it looks like Obamacare is basically collapsing. And I've got two questions for you. What's wrong with the exchanges, these healthcare exchanges that the ACA set up? And then how do we fix this problem?
Well, it's a good place to start. As you know, the first half of the Affordable Care Act, what we call Obamacare, set up these market exchanges mainly to eliminate pre-existing conditions, but also to provide subsidies for those who could not afford expensive health care insurance premiums, right? The problem, honestly, is prior to the market exchanges, we had an individual insurance market and an employer-provided insurance market, and those markets actually worked. The problem is if you were not in a large employer group and you had a pre-existing condition, then you probably had no access to the insurance market. So the market exchanges and Obamacare was designed to provide insurance for everyone who did not have it through their employers or could not afford the individual insurance because the premiums were a bit expensive, or they had pre-existing conditions. So what has worked and what hasn't worked? Well, the fact is we are covering pre-existing conditions for those who can afford it through the market exchange. The problem, what hasn't worked, is we have federal exchanges, and we should have state-based exchanges with risk pools for those who have pre-existing conditions and chronic conditions. And what we've found is the state exchanges have typically worked a lot better than the federal exchange.
So is that part of the solution now? Is that part of what Congress could do?
It is Congress do that? Jack. Yeah, it is part of the solution. But you need to first understand the problems that we now have. So number one, and most people understand this, but they don't understand how severe the problem is. The first problem is the premiums through the market exchange. For the bronze plan, the silver plan, the gold plan, the premiums are out of sight now. The premiums are now actually, and this is a fact, government stats, as of 2017, the premiums in the market exchange are 105% higher in 39 of the 50 states than they were even in 2013. So if you just compare 2017 premiums in the market exchange with the premiums prior to the exchanges, the premiums now are 105%
let me ask you this, Larry.
higher.
Should Congress now move in the direction of these state exchanges? Is that a way to do this? Should they do away with all of it, or move in the direction of setting up more of these?
No, we need to do away with federal exchanges. I mean, as you know, the computer system itself doesn't work as good as what was set up in the state exchanges. The state exchanges really are working better, but we do need risk pools at the state level funded by the subsidies at the federal level. Take those subsidies, fund those subsidies to the state based on their enrollment, right? And apples, and then the state, of course, each state sets up its own system.
I get it.
And we include, and again, pre-existing, everyone, it doesn't matter what party you are or what persuasion you are, everybody agrees that we need to cover pre-existing conditions.
Larry, I tell you what, that is well said. If we're real lucky, I want to have you back again to continue this conversation. I want to get more on exchanges and more on what you think we should do with the ACA. Larry Whittekine, President, CEO of IntegraNet, CEO at Electronic Medical. Larry, thanks so much.
This is a universe where everything is depicted as a Washington Post political cartoon.
Behind the Curtain with Jack Burkman.
Welcome back. Remember, if you want to take it behind the curtain, you call us 703-795-5364, 703-795-5364. We're taking your emails now as we enter the 20th century, not the 21st. Jack Burkman 2016 at Gmail. 2016@gmail. Same number, same email. If you know anything about the Seth Rich murder mystery. Well, joining us now, Ilya Shapiro, frequent contributor to this program, but that's the least of his wonderful resume. He's the director of the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. Before Cato, he was a special advisor to the multinational force in Iraq on rule of law issues. Ilya, welcome back.
Good to be back.
Well, let's talk Supreme Court. Let's talk the wonderful world of SCOTUS, where this program hasn't gone in some time, at least since Kavanaugh. Our friend Brett Kavanaugh, what would you say has been the impact on the court thus far in terms of rulings, demeanor, all the way around? What are you seeing?
Well, there haven't been too many rulings from the court altogether, ones that Kavanaugh wrote or participated in or anything, which is not unexpected. It's very early in the term. Term goes until June, of course, and there are 60-some, 70 cases that they'll be deciding. More kind of inside baseball scuttlebutt about, is he joining with Thomas and Gorsuch on dissents from denial of cert, meaning which cases are they taking up? Is he siding with John Roberts to be more moderate? And there's a bit of all of that, but that's what us insiders call the shadow
So
doc.
how is it shaping up now? In theory, the court now should be a solid 5-4 or even 6-3 conservative majority, right? But then the problem is Johnny Roberts, the turncoat, right? Isn't that where we are?
In John Roberts is the median vote. I won't call him the swing vote. I mean, he's not going to be like Kennedy. You can't predict what he's going to do. But he tries to moderate the court. He tries to take small steps rather than ruling broadly when you can. And so once these substantive decisions start coming down, we'll start seeing whether Kavanaugh is more towards the middle with Roberts or more towards the conservative or original.
I'm kind of presuming he's going to be with Thomas and Alito and the conservative. I'm presuming that. Is that a bad presumption? Are there elements of him that are confusing?
So there's some nuance there. I think you're right on the substance. When they actually decide issues and the rubber hits the road, I think he probably is more towards Gorsuch and Thomas and Alito. But in some of these decisions about whether to take a case, how broadly to rule, whether to issue a stay, meaning to stop the lower court action pending appeal, there he may be kind of more cagey and small p political alongside Roberts. Okay. But again, we don't know yet.
Let's look at this. How close are the court to taking action on some of the biggies? The obvious one, abortion. Do we need one more? In other words, my thinking is we've got to put another Gorsuch there or another Kavanaugh in place of when Ginsburg finally retires or Breyer retires or what have you. We need one more, which could take a Trump second term. It looks like it'll take a second term if there is one or some other Republican or whatever. I don't think we have quite the votes for abortion. What do you think on that?
Well, it depends what you mean by that, because the governing rule isn't Roe v. Wade. It's Planned Parenthood versus Casey. From 25 years ago, which changed Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade essentially put in a trimester rubric that you can't really restrict during the first trimester. During the third, you pretty much can. In the middle, it's kind of a sliding scale based on viability. Casey said kind of undue burden, which is, the joke is an undue burden is something that gives Anthony Kennedy a headache. Well, of course, Kennedy is gone now. So I think we're going to see incremental steps upholding certain kind of restrictions that might otherwise be struck down, and in effect, going back to the Roe v. Wade regime, which was in place from the early 70s until 1992. But I think you're right.
Well, let me ask you a broader question. Do we have the votes?
If the goal is to overturn Roe v. Wade altogether, that would take another justice, because I can't see John Roberts willing to overturn it altogether.
Okay, so that answers my question there. We're basically, to overturn the whole thing, kit and caboodle, we need one more. But if we're likely to get one more. I guess it depends a lot on whether Trump is reelected. Looking how all this impacts 2020, if Trump is reelected, we'll certainly get that one more. If he's not, then the issue is whether Ginsburg holds out until, if she holds to the middle of 2020, they won't be able to get one through anyway. I guess it all depends on Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
That's right, and I think the Supreme Court is going to be, and judicial nominations are going to be even more of an issue in the 2020 elections than they were in 2016 with the vacancy caused by Scalia's untimely passing. And, all the experts say, the statisticians, that Trump would not have won the election were it not for that Supreme Court vacancy.
Tell us about the recent Second Amendment case. What's happening now? The court's taken a Second Amendment case, first one in, a decade, 8 or 10 years, something like that. What do you see here?
Yeah, that's right. It's been really frustrating since the court declared an individual right in Heller, the D.C. case in 2008,
wow.
And then 2 years later applied that to the state, striking down a similar Chicago ban. It hasn't taken a right to keep bear arms case, even as the lower courts are all over the place, both in terms of result and in terms of how you evaluate challenges to gun regulations.
So it's time now to clean it up. This is going to be a good time for the court to clean all this stuff up. Do you think they're going to promulgate a new rule that is clear, or is it going to lead to more chaos, or what do you think is going to happen?
I mean, that is the question. The regulation at issue is out of New York City, prohibits you from transporting your gun past city lines. So let's say you have a vacation home or a gun range, or you want to hunt or something. You can't transport it that way. So it's about the right to carry arms in that sense, even though you're transporting it unloaded, disassembled, all the rest of it. And the more important, I think it's pretty clear that they'll strike down this rather draconian restriction. But the question is, what kind of standard will they establish for looking at other kinds of restrictions going forward? Because we have in California, the Ninth Circuit, in New Jersey, in the Third Circuit, in New York, in the Second Circuit, these courts are really engaged in civil disobedience, effectively saying, unless it's a complete ban on guns, we're gonna uphold all these restrictions.
So looking ahead to 2020, Ilya, now you make the good point that the Supreme Court will be more of an issue in 2020 maybe than it has ever been before in a national election. Who benefits more from the rallying? I would think the left benefits more, that the mobilization advantage it plays to their base because they know abortion is on the line. Republicans won't say that, but the whole right to abortion is on the line in 2020, right?
In theory, the court's been an issue every time. It really depends on who the candidate is and how credible he or she can make it. Hillary Clinton could have made more of an issue of the vacancy and simply did not, allowed Donald Trump to occupy that space. Probably the next Democratic nominee is not going to make that mistake. But it's not just about abortion, obviously. It's about the executive power over whether immigration or gun regulation or a whole host of other things. We can't really predict how the issues are going to shape up in terms of this battle over the Supreme Court.
Ilya Shapiro, director of the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at Cato, former special advisor to the multinational force in Iraq on all rule of law and legal issues. Ilya, thank you so much. If we're real lucky, we'll be able to have you back again. But remember, if you want to go behind the curtain, you call us 703-795-5364. Jack Burkman 2016 at Gmail. Jack Burkman 2016 at Gmail.
All the stories and controversies that no one talks about, but everyone should know about.
Why don't you get a toupee with some brains in it?
Behind the Curtain with Jack Burkman.
Welcome back. Remember, if you want to take it behind the curtain, you call us 703-795-5364, 703-795-5364. Operators standing by 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday, taking your emails. Jack Burkman 2016 at Gmail. Jack Burkman 2016 at Gmail. Joining us now, very special guest, Mike Torselli, my good friend. Mike, for those of you who may not know him, he's one of the foremost experts in the United States and indeed the world on opioid dependency treatment. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Jack.
Great to have you here on Radio America and to our Newsmax audience as well. Well, Mike, you've saved... Now, Trump, as you know, the reason we're so interested, everyone is so interested in this topic because opioid dependency treatment has become a huge issue for the president. As you may know, the president's older brother about 30 years ago died of drugs and alcohol. It's a terrible thing. So the Trump family has fought looking for treatment solutions for many, many years. This goes back to when Trump was a young man. I can tell you, this is one of the president's passions, and what you do is viewed as so important by the White House. Let me start out by asking you, just so our viewers know, give me a sense of how many lives you have saved, because this is really breathtaking for the country.
I don't like to say I've saved lives. It's really the individual that's got to get in and do the work. I've been involved in about 15,000 cases over the last 29 years. Okay.
Wow.
I've flown over 4 million miles doing family crisis interventions and done over 700 interventions. So that's where you get involved with somebody that's got a problem that doesn't admit that they have a problem. And so we get all the loved ones together. We sit down with them in a very compassionate way, and we work through a process that's designed to pull them out of their denial and put them in a position where they can hold their head high when it's time to make a decision to get help.
Now, as
it can be very effective.
15,000 lives. Wow, I would applaud if I could. Let me ask you this. As a national expert, do you generally agree with the way the president wants to deal with this?
Well, I think originally when he came out, it was about maybe 17, 18 months ago, and talked about, dealing with it with grants, okay? The problem is the industry is completely and totally ineffective. Okay, and it's
why is that? Tell us why that is. Why don't you tell our viewers why that is? So many people would like to know.
It's because there's a cookie cutter approach to all types of addicts. Okay, they treat an alcoholic the same way that they would treat somebody that's on meth and somebody that's on opiates, including heroin. And then you have the adulterated opiates, which are, the opioids, which are like the fentanyl-laced heroin that we see so much of. It is causing about 3,500 deaths a week, okay, which is astronomical. We've never seen anything like it, okay? The death rate in certain areas of the country is up 1,000%.
Now, let me get this straight. Just on heroin and related drugs, we're looking at 3,500 deaths a week. Is that what I heard you say? A week in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, it's twice as many as are killed in car accidents, even more than that. And I think the figure is very conservative because a lot of the deaths are caused by blood infections, because the contaminants that are put in these drugs that are sold on the street. And so
I see. So somebody might die of an infection. I see. There could be another 3,500 dying of infections, and we don't even know.
Exactly. I've got a kid in the hospital right now, a 27-year-old, where he had an abscess, and the infection, it's turned into MRSA, and it's going into his heart.
Oh.
And so they're giving him about a 30% chance of living. And this all happened within about a 3-day period. And we see this all the time, okay? So it's not just the well, first of all, fentanyl is such a powerful drug. And the difference between heroin and fentanyl is that fentanyl is made by scientists in a laboratory. It is what we call a synthetic opiate, okay? Whereas heroin comes from the opium poppy, and it's actually a lot healthier for you than the adulterated versions. This whole mess started with the advent of OxyContin. You might remember back in the late 90s when there was a pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma.
Yeah, I do remember.
Came out with this drug OxyContin, which was supposed to be the best possible painkiller when it came to people with HIV or people that were dying or losing limbs or dying from cancer or had level 10 pain levels, okay? What happened was the doctors got a hold of this, and that's when the pill mills started, okay? They started recruiting patients, and they were prescribing them OxyContin every month, and they'd go in, pay their $250, and get their prescription every month. Well, if you do the math, okay, if you have 400 patients coming in there for 3 minutes to get that prescription every month, you do the math. I mean, 400 times 250.
Boy, this is, I see now. Okay, so this is being driven. This problem then is being driven, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but by a combination of maybe lax federal policy up until now, lax laws, police not knowing what to do, pill mills and evil docs. I mean, it seems to me this is like a hydra-headed monster. We've got this is a complicated problem.
Right. It's no simple solution. There's a number of different problems that need to be addressed. Now, Trump did a good job stepping in and making the DEA stepped in, and they really made some changes. They revoked a lot of doctors' licenses, and they have really scrutinized the prescribing of.
Do you think they should just
opiates?
Should they just outlaw something like OxyContin altogether? Is that the solution? Maybe outlaw these things? Can we outlaw it?
The problem with that, Jack, is, and that's what we're seeing, is the people go to the street to get it, and then there's no quality control, and then they're going to get it one way or the other. As long as there's a supply, there's going to be a demand, there's going to be a supply. We saw it back, in the Reagan era, where Nancy got on TV and she said, just say no. Well, that's not the way it works with an addict, okay? As long as we have 15% of the population that wants to use this stuff, it's going to be available. And the problem with this fentanyl is the Chinese have figured out a way to make it real cheap, and it's not like heroin where you have to ship over tons and tons of the product to get it over the border. What they're doing is they are mailing it, they're UPSing it, they're Federal Expressing it, and so that's how it's getting into the country. One brick of fentanyl is the equivalent of a whole room of heroin. So they're using the fentanyl to cut the heroin, okay?
In your mind, the law enforcement stuff, harder law enforcement, outlawing, more police, all that stuff, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that doesn't really work, according to you, too well, because people buy it from the pushers in the street, right?
Yeah, it's not going to do anything at all. I mean, the wall is a great idea, but you know what? They'll find other ways of getting it in. It's a very small percent, comes across the border there. Like I said, the fentanyl is being shipped in, and it's coming in, across the Canadian border for the most part when they carry it in. But it's being mailed in is the deal. It's very hard to detect, and you can't check every package that comes across. There's no, reliable way to know if fentanyl is being shipped. And these guys are real slick. This Mexican mafia, let me tell you, this is a $1 trillion business, and they know what the hell they're doing. And they know how to get it in here, and they know how to distribute it, okay? And they're focusing on our young people. What used to be the last house on the block, which is heroin, has now become a very popular, very in-crowd type of drug. So wherein lies the problem. And of course, it's a dead end street.
Okay, let me ask you this. You may know this. Homeland Security now spends about 3/4 of its budget fighting the Mexican drug war, basically, or more.
Yeah.
Now, is that so? That's basically a complete waste of time because A, it's not effective. B, even if you could shut it off from there, it comes from other places. All of this has become a joke.
Yeah, exactly. I saw a bit on Fox News a few weeks ago, and these are the people that originally contacted me. It was Chris Christie and Dr. William Baum of the ONDCP, which is the Office on National Drug Policy, okay?
Yeah.
And there was 150 people on the phone, and they asked me a series of questions, and one of which was, how do we put a dent in this, Mike? What do we do? And the deal is there's no, simple answer to this. With the treatment plans we have available, we are set up for failure. The treatment centers countrywide are actually rewarded for failure, okay? I was on the phone with a kid yesterday that's been to treatment 27 times. Okay.
Jesus. And how old is that boy?
Yeah, he's 29 years old.
Oh my Lord! And 27 times.
From rehab to rehab, and see, this is what has happened unintentionally. What happened with Obamacare as well intended as it may have been, I never was a backer of Obamacare because I work in the insurance industry. But when you get the federal government involved and you make the rules, when you eliminate the pre-existing condition, okay, number one, and number two, you make it readily available, then all the crooks creep out of the woodwork, okay? And so now we found ourselves with thousands and thousands of new treatment centers that were buying policies from people on the street, okay? They could make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000
Jesus
by putting this person in treatment, and then they would pay the individual to go into treatment.
Jesus.
They call it body brokering.
Well, and I've heard these stories where they will go and get literally homeless people off the street and pay them to jump on the wagon, and then they bring them in.
It's exactly right.
It's horrible.
They put them in a hotel room, shoot them full of heroin, and then put them in treatment and get paid $5,000-$6,000 a head.
These people are almost like murderers. I mean, this is.
They are. There's no question. I've reported, probably 30 of them over the last few years. 11 of them have been indicted here in the last few months. It's just going to put a small dent in it. Now, we have another problem now, and that is the insurance companies have flexed their muscles. And as of January 1st, 2018, they cut all the chemical dependency benefits out of all the exchange and Obamacare policies. So they no longer cover treatment for chemical dependency. So that whole idea, they came out of the gate with really strong benefits. Obama made a promise to HealthNet. Don't worry, you're going to make a profit because all these young people are going to buy these policies and yada, yada, yada. Well, we know it didn't turn out that way, okay? A guy like me, my monthly rate on my
Mike Torricelli, I wish I had 2 hours. Mike, thank you so much. Mike Torricelli, ladies and gentlemen, one of the experts on opioid dependency treatment in this country, has saved 15,000 people. Well, remember, even when we're not on the air, you can hear us and see us and read all about us at jackburkmanradio.com and always at radioamerica.com. Thanks. We'll see you next week.